Okay, wonderful. Welcome everyone to today's online brown bag presentation. My name is Mandolen Loyola and I'm Associate Professor of Spanish at Rockford University. Together with Dr. Orhan Erdem, Associate Professor of Finance, we organize the Brown Bag Series, which this year is taking place online and hosted thanks to Vice President Stephen Cull and the Advancement Office staff and the Office of Philanthropy and Alumni Engagement here at Rockford University. I will start today by introducing our two speakers. Dr. Mandolen Mull is the chair of the Puri School of Business at Rockford University and an associate professor of leadership with a Ph.D. in organizational development. Sorry, as I let a few more people in. With a PhD in Organizational Development and Change and an MBA in International Business, Dr. Mull's expertise lies with operations management and leader development. Prior to joining the realm of academia, Dr. Mull accrued over a decade of corporate leadership experience in the fields of healthcare, property preservation, and logistical distribution. Possessing an extensive background in leadership and performance, Dr. Mull consults with organizations across the globe, providing analysis and interventions targeted to improve organizational performance outcomes. Dr. Mull also conducts scholarly research pertaining to leadership, intentions, change management, and operational statistics analyses. Our second presenter today is Clayton Duffy, a graduate student and teaching assistant at the University of Louisville's College of Education and Human Development. Currently, he is working towards his PhD in Educational Leadership and Organizational Development at the University of Louisville. Am I saying that right? Prior to this, he received a graduate degree in marketing from Rockford University, where he then worked in the trade show industry on various projects ranging from graphic design, social media management, promotion, and consumer client relations. After this, Clayton received his MBA from Rockford University, where he began his research and studies pertaining to organizational unlearning and the impact of individual brand identities on perceived leadership outcomes. Clayton has also taught leadership and research methods curriculum within the BS/MS degree program in the Puri School of Business at Rockford University. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Mull and Clayton Duffy.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So we really appreciate everybody dialing in. I didn't think we were going to have this many people, so this is exciting. This is really cool. Clay is now completely nervous. So Clay, would you like to go ahead and share your screen, and I'll kind of lay the foundation for what we're doing today. So this research is something that we actually submitted into the Academy of Human Resource Development. And that is my professional home. And it is the home that I introduce a lot of our students at RU to. And so just because, you know, it's what I know, it's what I got my doctorate in. And so the Academy of Human Resource Development is where last year Clay and I went and presented some research on organizational unlearning, which is actually the focus of Clay's dissertation now. And so we did some research on that last year. We were going to do a brown bag, and then COVID came. And so this is part two of a continuation of our research stream. And we've really embraced this idea of how we can utilize unlearning strategies to be more effective leaders, more effective developers. Because our field is human resource development. It's not human resource management. It's about how we develop other people. We're going to get into that a little bit more here in just a moment. But before I define all of that, and before we define what colluders are, I wanted to define what toxic leaders mean to Clay and I. Clay and I had a lot of conversations about how we would really think of bad leaders, right? And so often that characterization, I think, gets thrown around in a very cavalier nature. And through our discussions and our mentorship relationship, Clay and I really found and felt that toxic leaders are not truly toxic. The most toxic individuals we encounter are the people who do not develop another. That's what we found. It's not the people who have low emotional intelligence. It's not the people who maybe have low experience and aren't as great at helping or aren't as equipped to help. What we really found is it's the people who are unable or unwilling to develop other people. And so a great example of this is recently I was talking with someone, and they made a very important distinction for me that was a light bulb. And Stephen Cole's in here, and he sits in my class, and Pat Murphy knows this as well. I do light bulb moments at the end of a lot of my classes. Nick has seen that as well. And so this was a light bulb moment for me. And the individual was talking about a leader that they knew, and they said, that person is inconsiderate. And you're probably like me. Normally, when you think of inconsiderate, you think of an individual who is rude or disrespectful. But what this person went on to say is they said, I mean that they're inconsiderate in the way in which they literally do not consider other people. And I thought, oh, that's it. That's what I'm getting at. That's the toxic leaders that I think of. The people who, whether it is they intentionally or unintentionally are unaware of other people and their impact on other people, they do not consider what their impact is on another. And for my field and for Clay's field and for Jeff's field, this is something where as human resource developers, and Monique's in here too, and I know that this is a passion of hers, the ability to develop another person is truly our greatest gift. As a mentor to Clay and to Nick and to Pat that are in this session today, I have felt that my job is to take them where I am and help give them the tools to take them much further, right? As scholars, we all look at Google Scholar and we see the line at the bottom that says, standing on the shoulders of giants. So that truly is what we see as authentic leaders, as a holistic leaders. So toxic leaders on that sense would be to us, the people who aren't willing to do that or aren't capable of doing that. So Clay, if you'll take us to the next slide, what we talk about a lot of times is our job as human resource developers and as leaders. And so this doesn't really matter, and Clay was saying this earlier to me, it doesn't really matter whether you're an HRD scholar or an HRD practitioner. What matters is if you are charged with the task of developing another. And I think we all are, right? We're all our brothers and sisters keepers. But a lot of times what we believe is the tools that we give other people, that they will utilize those tools in the same way that we will. Sir Robert Dudley once said, you have the great weakness of the clear-minded. You think that others believe as you do. And I think that's really true. I tend to be pretty naive. I want to develop other people. And so I assume that if I'm developing Clay as my mentee, that he's going to go on and develop other people in the way in which I've shown him to do that. But the reality is that's not always the case. I was on a consulting project last year that Clay came along with me on, and we both had conversations where we were quite aware that some of the individuals in my leadership training were not considerate of their impact on other people. And I asked the question to Clay, how do I ethically, and how do I do this with integrity? How do I train these people and give them the tools to help other people if I know that they're only going to use it for their own betterment and not for other people's? That's not a sustainable path. How do I make sure that people don't weaponize the tools that I give them? How do I make sure that they keep these tools to be able to better and advance and develop their followers and their organizations? So Clay, if you'll go to the next slide. So the purpose of our research was really to challenge the assumption that we have as scholars that everyone we train is going to use the tools we give them for the betterment of others and in a positive way, because some people are going to use them for the betterment of solely themselves. And when that kind of dog eat dog, zero sum, I'm going to get mine, me, myself, I mentality happens, not only is it not sustainable for that individual, that is counterproductive behavior, but it's also not sustainable for the organization. Because once that person has achieved all the tools or all of the goals they wanted to achieve in that organization, they leave. And they haven't developed other people behind them. And they're not concerned with the disruption that they create in the wake. So our job really is to then say, not only how do we make sure we're being good stewards of our training, how do we be good stewards of the organizations in which we're going into, to say, if you have a culture that allows colluders to thrive, and we'll talk about what colluders are here in a minute, then you are basically inviting this kind of unsustainable pathway forward. You're setting yourself up for failure. And so as Clay and I had these kind of conversations, we started saying, how do we reframe? How do we reframe someone's mindset? How do we reframe the organizational context and the organizational culture to let people know that if I'm only looking out for myself, eventually I'm going to be out on an ice floe. I'm going to be out by myself and nobody's going to help me when I need it. And I'm not going to be able to have an impact on anybody else. We define leadership as being the ability to influence others. If we're no longer able to influence other people, we're no longer leaders. And so trying to help people understand that. And so that is where we've come out with utilizing unlearning strategies to help people be more sustainably successful. Clay, you want to go to the next? All right. And so we use some of our a definition of human resource development from some of my professors at the University of Texas at Tyler. And what we do, we believe that we develop organizations, but I can't develop an organization without developing teams. And I can't develop a team until I develop a person. And I can do that in one of three ways. I can do it by better leadership. I can do it by training. And I can do it by initiating some type of change initiative, or a combination of all three, or in totality of all three. So essentially, the way that we look at things is in the three-part process: the individual level, the group level, and the organizational level. And as we look at those things, we try to ask ourselves, are we trying to develop these people by leadership, by change, by training, or all the above, or a combination of the above? And so that is our role as human resource developers. But again, Clay and I have this conversation. We don't think it's just those of us that have an HRD title. We believe that this is any of us who are leaders, anybody who has a vested interest in the sustainable success of the companies that we work with, anybody who wants to build a legacy, right? So I believe very much in legacy building. I actually have a talk on that on Friday, and I think Clay hopefully is going to join me. But before some of you dialed in today, I was telling Dr. Loyola about the fact that Clay was my student, and I was still finishing up my PhD when he asked me to help him get ready for his own application into a PhD program. And I'm being able to give him the tools that I had to help take him to academy, help him get research, help him get experience with consulting. Certainly was passing on a torch. And through my consulting work, I got to meet Nick Lamb, who's here as well. Nick was in a training program that Clay came along and consulted with me on. Clay then taught Nick, because Nick's now in our BSMS program. Nick is convinced that I'm running some type of pyramid scheme here. And so I say that I think it's legacy building, right? And I believe very much in that. You know, I am here in Stephenville, Texas right now. I just saw my father pull up out front. And I can't drive around this community without, my father owns a stonemasonry company. So he's built this entire community over the last 40 some odd years. So I can't drive without this community without seeing my father's mark somewhere. I have to think as a leader what my legacy is. And it's certainly the people that I'm passing on my knowledge to. And so I have to be aware that that's not how everybody thinks. And that when I am training other people in businesses, when I'm talking to other leaders, that there are some people who really are laser focused on only their own success, not on building out the success of other people. And so I've got to think about how to have compassion for that and how to actually help them reframe and retarget their efforts to toward a more sustainable pathway. And so Clay's going to talk a little bit further about what those people look like and how we could go forward with that.
Yep. So very quickly before I do get into that, so this is kind of we'll just reiterate this question that we were kind of trying to start, or originally got us down this pathway of research and kind of starting to question, are we providing individuals the tools necessary to harm, or, maybe not harm, but negatively impact or affect the very organization that, we're tasked with developing, or that we are overseeing, or somehow we're involved in, right? So we've talked about already, kind of the potential for a colluder within our environment, or the potential for people to use our development, to use the resources that we've given them in a way that we didn't necessarily intend, whether they're doing it intentionally to try to just further themselves and kind of say, sayonara, I'm out of the organization after this, or whether they're just subconsciously, maybe they have those walls built up from previous employment and they're kind of just protective of the way that they extend themselves to other people. No matter the situation, we have to understand that, these are people that are within our organizations or could be within our organizations. So the definition that we used within the research that kind of guided our efforts was, we define a colluder as somebody who's ambitious, they desire status, or they see opportunity to profit. So if I'm somebody who's developing person A, right, and this person is a colluder, as I'm giving them these resources, as I'm developing them, showing them the ropes, they're not thinking, wow, how can I take this to then lead others? How can I use this to further my organizational goals, my team goals, everything like that? They are simply analyzing how they can use it for their own personal gain. Again, whether they're doing that on purpose and they're doing it to be malicious, or maybe that's just kind of how they've been taught to, like a dog eat dog world, or you've got to start climbing your way up the organization. And some people would argue that maybe isn't a bad thing, right? But we're here to kind of bring forward the idea that if you reframe it in a way, using organizational unlearning, which we'll get to here in a second, that the outcomes are going to be so much better for you as an individual, but also as a team, a group, department, organization as a whole. So let's take a look at what a colluder actually might look like, right? These are people who are going to be self-serving. We've kind of hit on that already, but they're unconcerned with team success or development, right? So this has benefited me. I'm out. I got what I needed done, or I have got myself on the right track for promotion, whatever the situation is. They're not so much looking at, hey, how are the people around me performing? How am I impacting them? How am I developing them using the tools that were given to me? Driven by individualized competition. So that might look like, maybe there's a team of 4 or 5 people, and I, as an individual, I'm always consistently looking at the people next to me who I'm supposed to be working with, and seeing, how can I be better than this person? How can I outshine this group of people as one person? And then, lastly, obviously prioritizing those outcomes that benefit themselves. So, maybe I can put enough time into developing this group, but what if I spend that time instead on myself and furthering myself? And what they're not seeing is, the potential benefits that could come from the outcomes of developing those people around you and moving forward together as a group and as a unit.
One thing on that, Clay, I was going to say too, is, some of our work with some colluders that we personally, Clay and I both have encountered, I two come to mind. One was an individual who had been with an organization for about 30 years. And I made the comment one day and I said, when was your last win? When did you have that last day that you went home and you're like, oh, killed it. That was awesome. And he goes, 3 years ago. And I said, oh, that sounds like it's been a tough 3 years then, buddy. That sounds like that's pretty sad. And he goes, well, I've been here 30 years and they don't appreciate me and all this. And I said, what's the legacy you leave behind you? You've been here 30 years. Act like it. You've been here 30 years and you've earned your stripes. So pass on the torch, right? What I see a lot of times is some disgruntled workers that feel like they haven't been recognized enough or something like that. And sometimes it is in the organizational context that's the problem. The other part of it that I always bring back to that one individual, though, is it's only your life we're talking about. It's only your happiness. And if you're waiting to find that fulfillment and that engagement contingent upon a third party, you're never going to find it. But if you focus on with the legacy that you are building, if you reframe your mindset and say, I have paid my dues, I have done good work. However, when I walk out of this organization, whether it is because I go on to a different one or I am retiring, the reality is all of our roles are finite. All of us have a limited time that we serve in the roles we are called to serve in, regardless of whether we leave, of our own volition, or we stay for a company, for decades. We are, that role is finite. And so we want to be mindful and good stewards of the idea of when we walk out of these doors, what's the mark that we left behind us? Do we want people to say, my gosh, I'm so glad she's gone. She was such an albatross? Or is it, man, when people talk about that person, they talk about him in reverence. Some of you are around when Gary Lubert was at RU. I never got to meet him, sadly, but I have heard the stories of that man and the reverence in which people speak of him and the mark that he has continued to leave on Rockford University, that I didn't need to meet him. I wish I had. I've heard wonderful things, but I know what his legacy has been on our institution. And I think a lot about that as I coach people that I see maybe have a little bit of this chip on their shoulder, this inability that still kind of look out for other people. The other type of colluder that I'm thinking of is Clay alluded to this, these people that dog eat dog mentality, that what they believe is I can't rely on anyone else, so I've got to rely on myself. I've got to trust myself. And there's two things that I focus on there with those individuals. One is you have weaknesses. You have weaknesses inherent. And we talk a lot about the idea that my students have heard me say, if you have a dream and you can achieve it all on your own, you're dreaming too small. Meaning you're going to limit yourself, you're going to max out, and you're going to peak too soon. You are going to peak too soon. Because you are limited by your own thoughts, your own experiences, your own talents, your own strengths. You need to complement those. You need to offset those with a team environment. Now, I do see some organizations make the mistake of encouraging team performance, encouraging people to interact as teams, to get things done as teams. That's absolutely appropriate. But the problem where this occurs is they recognize individual behaviors. So they want everybody to work as a team. They want everybody to accomplish team goals. But as far as bonuses or accolades, praise, awards, it goes to an individual. It doesn't go to a department. It doesn't go to a team. That's competing priorities. And that reinforces that culture in the organization of, I'm going to get mine. I'm going to look out for myself. I want the accolades. And when we think like that, if we have enough people in our organization who think like that, we will have a revolving door. We will not have legacy builders. We will not have torchbearers. We will have revolving doors. We will have people who come in and say, I'm going to take everything out of this organization that I can to better my own resume or my CV and my own experiences. And maybe I leave a positive mark, whatever, that's ancillary. And then I leave and I go. And again, I'm not passing on the knowledge that I have. I'm not creating a smooth transition, etc. Not doing succession planning. I'm not developing other people behind me. So that is something I wanted to kind of bring to light, is these are the type of colluders that I see sometimes. Again, I don't find that these people are truly nefarious in and of themselves. But I think in order for me to be an effective leader to those people, I need to understand a little bit of why they are behaving the way they are, and then how to mitigate that, how to correct that, how to get them to see that that kind of approach is not only damaging everyone else around them, which is really my heart. That bothers me so much. It's the antithesis of what I stand for, but they're damaging themselves. And then they're going to be that disgruntled worker who says, I've been here 30 years and I think I'm still entitled to a lot, right? So I wanted to interject that. Sorry, Clay.
No problem. And to be honest, I want to reinforce that really quick, so the reason that I feel I'm personally so drawn to this research and I'm so bought into this idea is, to a certain extent, I feel as if I was living that. After I graduated undergrad, I felt like I wasn't making an impact. I wasn't working with my teams to develop that kind of lasting impression on an organization or the industry and stuff like that. So then going back to school and working my way up to teaching and stuff like that, it's been really empowering and engaging to work with people beside me, help develop them, or have them develop me, and kind of have that mutually beneficial relationship where we're not, at each other's throats or dog eat dog trying to better one another. We're looking out for just the growth of, our research, our industry, our institution, whatever the situation is. So I felt that empowerment and that engagement that comes from, really working with the people beside you and kind of straying away from that, I've got to be successful for me, attitude. And so, we'll get into here now. We've identified that we could have those colluders or that this exists, right? But how do we mitigate that? How do we navigate around it, especially as HRD professionals or leaders or somebody who is responsible for the development of, a person next to us, below us, whatever the situation is? So to give you guys a quick background on what organizational unlearning is, as Mandolen's mentioned, we were going to do a brown bag. Was it last spring? I'm not 100% sure, but COVID had other ideas. But organizational unlearning is the idea of how do we, to some extent, and this might sound daunting, but disrupt that equilibrium. How do we kind of challenge that status quo of we've always done it this way, or hey, it's working. You know what I mean? We've been doing this for 10 years. I don't see an issue with it. How do we set aside that process, those beliefs, those norms, and just say, hey, is this truly the best way? Are we doing it because it's the best, most efficient way? It gets us the best outcome for all involved? Or are we doing it because it's comfortable? And so initially, when we had looked this up, and for the most part, I think our prior paper and the one that we're working on now, we were really looking into the organizational aspect. But what Mandolen and I have kind of come across and seen was that this isn't necessarily just an organizational thing, right? This unlearning aspect needs to be implemented across all the levels, organizations, the teams, the groups, because we can implement that at an individual level, right? I can ask myself, am I doing this for the better of my group or myself? I can be trying to unlearn those tendencies, but if only I'm doing that and my organization or my team is allowing that or helping that, they're being maybe an enabler, or they're allowing that to be facilitated through their organization, that's going to catch up eventually. Those people are going to get through the cracks. Those people are going to, we talked about that revolving door. So unlearning really is something that in this situation needs to be implemented and is beneficial at the individual, the group, and the organizational level. So we've kind of briefly talked about, the summary of unlearning, but our actual operational definition is unlearning is the systematic process of intentionally trying to reduce the impact of prior experience and organizing situational information to create the necessary space to facilitate actionable interventions to support something new. So very quickly, one of the things that I want to explain here is we're not necessarily making a judgment call. We're not saying, hey, this is the way that it needs, or this is wrong. What we were doing last week is wrong. We're just setting this aside. We're continuously asking ourselves, can we change this? How can we reframe this? How can we make this better? So if we think about, what does that look like in this situation? We're at an organization that has, multiple colluders, or a department with a single person who we think is, potentially engaging in those self-serving behaviors. How does this benefit me? And we take a look at this in two separate ways. We take a look at it from the leader perspective. So me as somebody who is providing that development, providing those resources, giving my time, my effort. And then we'll also talk about, what that looks like for the, the mentee or the self-serving employee who, again, whether intentionally or not, is utilizing our development in a way that's not as positive as it could be. So first with leaders, unlearning helps us challenge that assumption. We've talked about, Mandolen as an example, right, has given me all these different resources in this development, right? And she's going to assume that I'm going to use that for good. I'm going to go forward and, I hope that I am, and I hope that I do continue to do that, right? But there is, before this, there's that assumption that, hey, I gave this person the right stuff, the right resources. I was kind to them and I helped develop them, I assume they're going to go do the same exact thing. And while we hope that that's the case, we can't just be blind to the fact that that, isn't necessarily true in all cases. So it helps us kind of, again, just challenge that assumption, break that mold of just continuously assuming that. It helps us reframe change and developmental opportunities. So maybe in the way that we are kind of working with this colluder, working with somebody who we are worried isn't using our tools to the best of the, organization's outcomes or preferred outcomes, anything like that. It helps us reframe that. How can we make this something that is positive for the individual that we're working with, but also at the team level, at the organizational level? Sorry if you guys can hear that. I have an arcade game over here in the corner. I don't know if you guys can hear that. It's deciding to go off and play some music. So if you can hear that, my apologies. Lastly, with the leaders, we're providing that sustainable developmental effort and outcomes. So we're not just, I'll talk about Mandolen and I again. She's not just giving me the developmental resources to kind of go out and be successful on my own, right? She's given me that, and I'm taking that forward to provide that sustainable development of the people around me, the teams that I work with, the organizations that I work with. So we're not just, doing kind of a one and done, hey, I helped this person, I developed this person. We're leaving that legacy. We're leaving sustainable change, sustainable development across these organizations and across these teams that we're working with. So let's think about it as a trainee or as a colluder, right? How does this benefit me? Well, more developmental opportunities. If I'm, kind of opening myself up to that, and I'm understanding that, hey, working with the people alongside of me, these group outcomes are going to be much more fulfilling or just as engaging as my individual success. That's going to open the door to so many more developmental opportunities because I'm going to be working with people side by side, and I'm going to be excited and open to, be developed by them or to develop them, no matter what that situation looks like. Sustainable team and organizational success. So, I think we've talked about this before, Mandolen and I, but there's that plateau of individual success, right? We can only get so far. I, as an individual, can only get so far in an organization. I can only get so far in my individual career. But how good does that team or that organizational success feel, right? And how good does that feel when it's sustainable? I've given my efforts to the people alongside of me. This organization is going to be continuously successful because I've taken what's been given to me and I've reciprocated that in a positive way. And this is just kind of, how can we use unlearning to, get that across, reframe that, and make that a little bit more inviting of a strategy. And then lastly, expanding the network of your colleagues and partners. I'm a big proponent of, the more people I can work with, the more people that, I develop that rapport with, I think it's nothing but beneficial for you, right? And so if I'm working with those people and I'm expanding and I'm opening myself up to develop them, that's just furthering my network. That's not going to hurt me whatsoever. I'm going to meet more people. I'm going to have more business opportunities because I'm doing these things, because I'm opening myself up to develop other people. Whereas if I was self-serving and I was just like, hey, I got to get A to B and I'm done for the day. I'm not working with these people. I'm selling myself short of the opportunity to work with some great people or to learn with some great people. So these are just kind of some of the things that unlearning can do across leaders and trainees and mentees to kind of help facilitate that sustainable change, that sustainable development across organizations, teams, and individuals.
And one thing I would say to that is, when we talk about unlearning and we define it, we talk about the intentional action, right? So so much, and my students have heard me say this, when we think about sports, 90% of sports, we spend 90% of our time practicing, reviewing, training, and 10% executing. And yet when we are, going about our day-to-day lives at work, it's usually the flip of that, right? Usually we're executing 90% of the time, if not more. And we do very little reflection, intentionality, training, development, these kinds of things to make us better. And so when we talk about unlearning, the reason this is really important is our brains are programmed to see things as good, bad, right, wrong, very dichotomatic thinking. And so when we get ourselves into those kinds of situations, we're actually working against our own biology there. We're working against the things that feel intuitively right. So again, when we think about bad or toxic leaders, it's very easy to kind of paint that with a really broad paintbrush. This person may have performed a bad action. They may have exhibited bad behaviors, but our brains want us to, especially when we're in conflict. When you and I are in conflict with each other, if your bad behavior has created conflict within me, it's very easy for me to say, you are wrong, I am right. Us versus them type mentality. And that is not conducive to sustainability for either of us, and certainly not for the organization. And so unlearning makes us create that space. It intentionally makes us pause and see where we can have empathy, where we can have some kind of understanding. We may not necessarily agree with that person's behaviors. I personally, when I first started this research, we got onto unlearning actually because of Dr. Jeff Allen, who's on here, who's one of my mentors, had mentioned something about unlearning. I really got interested in it, brought it to Clay. We talked a lot about it. And as I said, this is what Clay's doing his dissertation on. But for me, it was this idea of creating this intentionality and understanding when when I started with colluders, I didn't want to be around them. I wanted to be part of the mean girl club. I wanted to ice them out. I wanted to like colluders made me really nervous, to be honest with you. Narcissistic leaders, I can deal with. I can have empathy for narcissistic leaders. I can have empathy for inexperienced leaders. What I had difficulty with was people who colluded by hook or by crook to advance themselves. Because I didn't really understand that mentality, right? Like I said, I really believe that quote from Sir Robert Dudley, I believe other people think like I do. That's not to mean I don't make mistakes. Stephen Colby once said, we judge others based on their behaviors and we judge ourselves based on our intentions. And I think that's really true. And so what unlearning allows us to do is that intentional act to say, hang on just a second. Let's see if we can try to create a space of understanding. Maybe we don't agree, not a space of agreement, but a space of understanding. If I can understand that this person believes that this is in their best interest, then I can find ways to tell them it's not. It truly isn't in your best interest. If I can find ways to create space to understand that the reason I feel this way towards this person is because I'm in conflict with them, and biology says it's, me versus you, then that says, okay, I don't have to be a victim of my own biology. I can actually be intentional and be a driver of this. And so this is really where our conversations have been going. It was something I personally struggled with as a mentor, as a leader, as a consultant, as a professor. How do I help people that I maybe don't like, or maybe I'm worried that they're not going to help other people? I firmly believe my whole purpose on earth is to develop leaders who go on to develop other leaders. Breadth doesn't matter to me. I'd love to develop everyone, but depth. If my mentees that are dialed in right now, if they weren't going to invest in other people, I really don't have a lot of time to invest in them. If all they're going to do is take the tools that I give them and only advance themselves and not pass it on, that's not my purpose. That's not living my life and my sole purpose on why I think I'm here on earth and my legacy. So I have to be a good steward of that, which means I have to be a good steward of the trust that people are putting into me as their leader. And that means I need to be more intentional versus reactive versus just kind of being, again, a victim of circumstance, or being unaware, being inconsiderate, right? I need to be more considerate of the responsibility given to me. And so this is where our research has taken us. We've got some pathways forward on this, but we would love to hear any thoughts or feedbacks or question or discussions you guys have for us. I am waiting for Dr. Jeff Allen to say something to us, because I feel like that's going to happen. Right, Clay?
We're both waiting.
It should be known that Dr. Jeff Allen I call him the shepherd and the sage. as my mentor, and he's been a wonderful, wonderfully developmental mentor to both Clay and I in our work. And so we always get these great pearls of wisdom from him. Talking you up, Joe. You're muted. I can't hear you.
That's the only thing that can mute me. Okay, so I have a question. At the very beginning of the conversation, there was a statement, how do I know that they will not weaponize the tools that I give them for the betterment of them versus the betterment of others?
Right.
So how do, I don't know that I can change a person's intention, but how do I change the training environment or the environment of the learning organization to switch that switch? Do we just remove that leader because they're going to weaponize it? Or how do we change the climate of the organization from the bottom or the top to be able to either insulate that person or bring them into a fold of a different thought?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't think it's insulating. That was my initial reaction on that, Jeff, was my initial reaction was to inoculate, right? Like ice them out, put them to where they can't harm other people. More so now what I believe, and through our work, is I think we have to start letting people see how the quickest way to promote themselves is to promote other people, right? Is to be able to see that none of us like egotistical people. We don't like the people that are only about themselves. We don't like the people who are negative. We always like people who say nice things about other people. And there's a reframing and a coaching strategy that gets involved in this unlearning, is the idea of how good does it make you feel when you get to see other people succeed? When you were a part of their success, or you were collaborating with that success, or you see the team and the collaboration, and Clay hit on that a little bit. And so it really is a coaching strategy, more so of the tapping into that emotional reward, that when I see other people succeed, or I brag about somebody else's great work, how proud I am of them, how excited I am for them, and how rewarding that experience is. And so more of our work is shifting to that, bringing people into the fold through that training strategies, and that understanding that what got you here won't get you there. That at some point, you being a sledgehammer in your career, you're going to run up against somebody else who isn't impressed with you. You're going to run up against people who, no longer really care that you've accomplished what you've accomplished. And if you don't try to work with them, you are going to find potentially that they may be threatened by you. And that's not sustainable either, right? Because when somebody feels threatened by you, there's a good chance that they have the ability to hold you down. And I see this a lot in organizations. So what I try to focus on is helping people see, to eliminate distractions that aren't contributing to the collective success of themselves and other people. Clay, what would you like to add there?
I wish I could hit it on the head, honestly. One thing I will say is Jeff mentioned that top to bottom, right? And I just want to kind of reiterate what we were talking about earlier with how important that is to understand that this is not only an individual issue, but it's a team, a department, an organizational issue. This is something that if we don't utilize it across all of those different, forms of the organization, we're going to lose it. It's not going to be as beneficial, or the outcomes that we receive from it aren't going to be as positive as we, even if we had that intention, even if we were like, hey, let's work with this one individual, if there's still that culture, there's still that organizational culture of, hey, we're just going to let this happen, or we're allowing this, whether we are on purpose or not, that's going to really diminish the efforts that we put in at the individual level.
Well, and I can say, I can be proud of some of my own accomplishments, but I will never feel as good as my own accomplishments as I do of those that I've mentored, right? Like, I mean, when Clay got accepted into University of Louisville, like, I mean, you just forget it. I was so excited. I am way more excited than I was the day that I got into my PhD program, right?
He was more excited than I was.
I was more excited, I think, than his parents. Like, like, it was really, really great. You know, my parents, like, it's so funny. They know Clay because they, if you know, we've kind of been in the trenches together through his studies because I've done a lot of growing up as a mentor with him. Because I'd never taken someone into a PhD program before. I had never, I was taking him into places I'd never been, and he was trusting me to do that. And I had to make sure that I was a really good steward of that trust and that I didn't abuse that trust. And that's not to say I've always gotten it right. Sometimes it's just the blind leading the blind. But I've always, you know, I think hopefully, you know, really tried to be intentional about where I was taking him, and helping him and giving him the space too to understand if he wanted to go somewhere else, if he wanted to change his goals. You know, he's given me a couple of heart attacks when he says, hey, what if I don't want to finish my PhD? And I'm like, and that's where, again, that intentional moment, right? That I have to sit here and go, Clay, my goals for you don't have to be your goals for you. You know, I have to be, I have to appreciate that in the same way, where I say I need to be considerate of my role as a mentor or as a leader. For me not to be toxic to him, I need to be mindful of the fact that he may change his goal. He may change his path, and I need to allow that, right? If I truly care about his development and his success, his path may not be the one that Mandolen and Mull set out for him. Now, it is my job as his mentor to paint the picture of what could be and to help him get there if he wants to get there. But it also needs to be my job to say, if you change your mind, if your path alters, I will still develop and support you. I will still be here for you. And because you've asked me to be your mentor, you've asked me to develop you. And so sometimes I see that mistake of leaders too, but that means we could flip into that toxic leader where we're being inconsiderate of how badly we want this for somebody. You know, like Nick wanted to get his bachelor's degree. I really wanted that for him, but I had to be super supportive and being like, Nick, I'm here either way. I know, no pressure. You know, in the background, I'm like, oh, I hope he does it. You know, so I think that that's also part of highlighting the fact that we can be well-intentioned leaders, but if we're not paying attention to that intentionality and our impact on other people, we are being inconsiderate. And that inconsiderate aspect is that toxic leader. So it's not always the nefarious people you think of, right? It's not these like, you know, evil cartoon characters. Sometimes we really do mean well and we just perform badly or we execute badly. And so that's where we can help coach each other through these kind of environments, I think.
Thanks.
So, time for maybe one more question. Does anyone have another question they want to ask Dr. Mull and Clay?
I have one.
Sure.
I guess my question is as a leader, do you intend to train everybody, or is the leader picking who gets the tools and who goes down that path?
That's a really great question, Jason. And I will be honest with you, I would love to be something. Clay and I've had this conversation before, and some of my other mentees. The opportunity is always there for any student, the ones who come and ask for the development. And Clay and I had this conversation when he said, will you be my mentor and help me get into a PhD program? I said, understand, when I'm your mentor, kid, I get in the trenches with you. Your successes, I will celebrate. And your setbacks, I will cry right there with you. We are in it together. Like, I'm not going to sit here and be a superficial, you know, coach that just kind of cheers you on the side. I'm there with you. We are in this together. I would say that I think that's true for the majority of the people that I mentor and I train and coach. Some want more than others. Some soak up more than others, right? You know, I mean, some of them will take a lot more from you and give back a lot more. So I think to be a good steward and a good leader is you don't train everybody the same way. So you have to be cognizant of the fact that some are going to want a lot more. Now, the thing that Clay has learned from me in our mentorship, sorry, Clay, I'm going to throw you under the bus for a second, is when Clay isn't all dialed in, Mandolen isn't either. I step back because I've told him, you don't get to distract me from other people who need my mentorship as well in my coaching and development. If you're not going to take it seriously, no harm, no foul, but don't expect me to be right there with you while you're not investing in yourself. I cannot be more invested in your own development than you are. So as long as you're invested in your own development, I will be right there with you. But when you check out, don't expect me to be, I'll kind of be trying to pull you, but I've got other people who deserve my time and efforts as well. And so I am a little bit selfish about that, I'll be honest. But I'm selfish in the sense that I think we have to meet our people where they need us. And I won't let people drain me at the expense of someone else who needs my help. And I think that means that I'm being good stewards of those that I develop. Clay, do you have something you want to add to that?
No, not really. Well said. I absolutely agree. I think, for me, obviously I'm working on garnering that experience of mentoring people and kind of helping develop these people around me. But in terms of, training everybody the same or kind of making that the priority for everybody, I'm going to have to sit on that actually, Dr. Hunter. That's a good question. But for me right now, I think my strategy or my thought on that is I agree with what you said, Mandolen, about, giving what they're prepared to take and what they are going to run with and use. But I'm just trying to give that person the best version of me while still being cognizant of the fact that, I might need to work around this with this person, maybe being a quote unquote colluder or being someone with self-serving attitudes. I'm going to give this person the best that I have, the most development that I can give them while still being aware of that and still not necessarily being on my toes or being, having that wall up, but just understanding that this is possible, and trying to keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, I would love to be able to focus on that breadth, but I think another part of that, honestly, is being able to, if you create, whether Nick calls it my pyramid scheme or not, if you create other leaders around you, they help carry that too, right? And so I know Clay is able to, he's worked alongside Nick. I know, Jeff, I've got some friends who in our little group that have mentored me and mentored Clay. So I'm not Clay's only mentor. Jeff's been able to mentor him and introduce each other into that. So it's not all on my shoulders. And I don't mean that in a burdensome way, but just saying, that idea of, I don't want to be his sole mentor, because that means I'm only giving him my vision. And who am I? If I truly genuinely care about him and his development, I need to give him all the tools in my toolbox. And that means exposing him to other mentors who have, much more talent and experience and insight than I do. And so I think sometimes it's also, we develop people by connections. And, Dr. Loyola and I were talking about that beforehand of connecting people and those pieces into place. So I think that's another component there that's really valuable and honestly underutilized, but it feeds into this conversation of why the dog eat dog mentality doesn't really work anymore.
Well, on that note, that was a wonderful ending to a wonderful presentation. Thank you both. This is really valuable, and it gives us all a lot of food for thought. I think in many respects, we're all called to be leaders in sort of informal and formal ways, and it's all a work in progress. So thank you all for joining us today. Thank you to our presenters, especially for their time and their effort and their thought and your wonderful questions. The recording of this presentation will be on the alumni page within a week or so. Thank you again.
Thank you.
And have a great afternoon.
Thank you for having us, guys.
Thank you so much.